A true story written on the paper love cannot burn. Love and death. This is a true story. The hinge is in the grammar. Love is what is true. Death is what makes it a story. Truth does not need a narrator. Only fiction needs a voice to keep it alive. Love is not a plot. Love is the light by which plots are seen. Death is not an event. Death is a conclusion the ego demands so it can feel the stakes. The ego does not want truth. It wants suspense. It wants the trembling line between mine and lost. So it writes a world where love is rented, time is real, and endings are holy. And then it calls the rent meaning. And then it calls the eviction death. And then it calls the whole thing life. The sentence, "This is a true story," is a confession. Because truth is always the part that does not change, and story is always the part that does. A Course in Miracles draws the boundary with surgical clarity. What is real cannot be threatened. What is unreal does not exist. Love is unthreatenable, which is another way of saying love is real. Death is nothing but threat, which is another way of saying death is unreal. That is not poetry. That is diagnosis. Imagine a book held open in a windstorm. Pages whip and bend and tear. Ink smears. A chapter disappears into the air like ash. The ego points at the shredded paper and says, "See, it's gone." But the ego never notices what remains, even when every page is ripped out. The light that allowed the reading in the first place is still here. That light was never inside the paper. It was never owned by the story. It was never threatened by the plot twist. Death is the ego pointing at torn pages and pretending the light has been destroyed. Love is the light that does not argue. Love simply continues to illuminate. Grief, then, is not the price of love. Grief is the moment the mind tries to protect a story that can no longer hold. Grief is the hand reaching for a character who was never the source. Grief is the shock of discovering how much faith was placed in form. Because form is the ego's altar. Bodies are the ego's proof. Timelines are the ego's courtroom exhibits. Photos are the ego's tiny reliquaries, little rectangles of "this was real." And yet love cannot be framed. Love cannot be archived. Love cannot be kept the way a name can be kept. That is why love is so frightening to the ego. Love refuses to be possessed. Love refuses to be negotiated. Love refuses to be measured in duration. The ego hears that refusal as abandonment, but it is actually freedom. Here is the deeper level. Death is not mainly the body stopping. Death is the belief that separation happened and must be defended. Death is the mind's vow that individuality is real and therefore loss is inevitable. Death is the ego's final argument for specialness, because specialness requires scarcity, and scarcity requires endings. So death is not the end of life. Death is the engine that makes the ego's version of love feel urgent. It is the ticking clock that makes attachment feel romantic. It is the threat that makes bargaining feel like devotion. It is the gun on the table in Act 1. The ego calls that gun reality. Love calls it nothing. This is why true love feels less like possession and more like recognition. Recognition does not cling. Recognition does not panic. Recognition does not need guarantees. Recognition is calm because it is not trying to keep anything. Recognition is certain because it is not depending on anything. And recognition is what love looks like when the story falls away. The Course's correction is not sentimental. It is ruthless toward illusion and gentle toward the mind that believed it. The correction is not get over it. The correction is see what was never true. Not as denial of feeling, but as removal of the false cause. Because pain is never caused by love. Pain is caused by the belief that love was located where loss could reach it. So the healing is not the repair of a story. The healing is the release of the narrator who insists the story defines what is real. Death is the narrator's signature at the bottom of the page. Love is the blankness underneath the ink, untouched, waiting for no one, dependent on nothing. And that is why the line lands so hard. Love and death. This is a true story. It tells on itself. Love is the true. Death is the story. And the moment that is seen, the whole genre loses its grip. Because truth does not end. And love is truth.